once someone uses it, they love it and they want another one. Usually they're saying, man, I wish you'd forced me to do this sooner. The turnaround so they could get them out in 90 days. Well, what we didn't realize is they sort of paused processing anything on the digital side until they finished the paper. The real benefit of the gun trust in my mind are two things.
Welcome to the Built to Hunt podcast, brought to you by the team of hunt advisors at the Huntin Fool magazine, where we are dedicated to helping our members go on more hunts with better information. Join Huntin Fool today at huntinfool.com.
Okay, welcome to another Built to Hunt podcast. Austin and Jessica here from the Huntin Fool, and we have a special guest here today. We have Mr. Brandon Maddox from Silencer Central. What's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Always a good time. I know we got to sit down in person at the Hunt Expo not too long ago. Heck, it's been a month, I guess, but whew, time flies. But we got to be educated, I will say, from the man himself behind Silencer Central, and looking forward to diving in a little bit more and seeing just how we can put a silencer in the hands of all these hunters out there.
Hey, sounds like a good plan to me.
I want to start a little bit. Obviously, you are always dealing with the history of the tax stamp program and the ATF, and how did you get drug into this mess? I'll start there and tell me a little bit of your story coming into this world.
Yeah, good question. So I think people think it's odd that I'm a pharmacist by trade. So I went to pharmacy school. I keep my pharmacy license up. And I moved to South Dakota because my wife is from here, and decided that prairie dogs sound like something fun and exciting to hunt. I like the idea of you could wear shorts and you could set up at a bench and not have to move around. And farmers were welcoming you and even offering to help maybe pay for your ammo years ago. And, people just saw them as a huge nuisance and they kind of wanted help getting rid of them. So I thought, man, this is perfect because whatever I bring home, my wife's not going to cook anyway. So to be able to shoot something that I could just leave there was attractive to see. So I started shooting prairie dogs. And what I found was, they're more astute than people realize. One shot and they're kind of in the hole. And then you have to kind of wait for a while to shoot again. So I, sort of had this idea of, gosh, if I could just get a suppressor and suppress the sound a little bit, it would make a big difference. And it took me a while to get a suppressor and went through the process. And once I used it, it was totally a game changer on varmints. And, it's one of those things that when I went through the process, I didn't get the right one and the process was horrible. And then the second one I got wasn't the right one either, and the process was horrible. So I was like, gosh, on the third one, I'm going to get my own license and just do this myself. And the license is rather expensive. So then that put the onus on me to figure out how to generate the revenue to pay for the license. And I guess the rest is history. I mean, I paralleled it for a long time. I've been doing it for over 18 years. So I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, sort of mostly in like the sales and the marketing side for years, and just kind of did it parallel until at some point, honestly, I got fired at my day job when they found out I was doing this, quite a bit. So once they fired me, I just said, I got to double down. And against my wife's, thoughts, I was like, well, if I can't, double down and do this full time during a Democrat in office with Obama, then, I've got bigger problems. So I jumped in head first and been doing it ever since. So yeah, we started in 2005, and back then it was just working gun shows. That was really honestly the best way for me to understand what the customer was looking for in products, but also what they were looking for in streamlining the process. So I would say that's one advantage that I sort of bring to the table. A lot of manufacturers will sell to a wholesaler, and then the wholesaler sells to the dealer. Whereas pretty much what we do is we're your single point of contact. We're your manufacturer, we're your wholesaler, and we're your dealer. And Silencer Central's in all 42 states where silencers are legal. So a phone call to us starts the process that we manage for you, and then we're able to mail it to your front door when it's approved.
I think that's the interesting part, because so many people I find that don't hunt with a suppressor, don't have one, it's just because they are scared of the process. It's not so much the cost anymore, right? When that tax stamp was created, that was intended to be an expensive tax stamp.
Oh, yeah.
Now a $200 tax stamp is like, well, just give it to me. But, how do you help those guys overcome the fear of, I don't want to do the paperwork. I don't know how to do the paperwork. I don't know where to start. Like, what is the full service there?
Yeah, good question. And again, that was my insight that once like people would come up to me at these shows and I could tell they had a million questions about the process. So that means it was an educational gap. But what I found is once I answered all their questions and they kind of looked at me like, wow, this dude's got it figured out. Then they said, how do we get started? They didn't say, I want a Chevy or Ford or Porsche. Or, I mean, there's like no loyalty there. It was all the biggest issue is the process. And once they feel you've solved that, then they're in. So, and it's evolved over time. So the process has evolved in us making it simpler. I think one thing that we took a different approach as well is I realized really quickly when I had store number two. So I started in South Dakota. Store number two was North Dakota. I realized honestly I didn't know what I was doing. It just created so many different levels of complexity to have two locations, and staffing it, and what's a transfer, what's not, and how do you figure all this out. And I really just doubled down on the compliance part. And one thing I did is just reach out to ATF and said, hey, um, I my dad went to pharmacy school at Auburn, so I like to wear orange, but I don't want to wear a full orange jumpsuit. So help me help me kind of understand what the rules are. In a lot of cases, at least in the field, the ATF was they weren't well educated on them because they weren't very popular 20 years ago, and so it just required me to sort of figure out where I could go to any national event and I could sit on the front row and listen to the ATF talk about how they interpret the rules, because the rules for silencers were written in 1934. It's so long ago that a lot of it's not necessarily applicable now. So it's really how do they interpret it? And that's hard to do unless you can get in their head. And I would just say just working with them over the years, getting into their head has really helped me be able to scale the business and find ways to make it simpler. So some things we do to make it simpler are we'll send you all the paperwork digitally. So it's just kind of a DocuSign, signature type process. The statutes in 34, there was really no national database for background checks. So they do a fingerprint background check, which is kind of the norm. If you're arrested as a felon, they have your fingerprints on file, the FBI. So what we do is we mail you a fingerprint card in ink where you can just do them from the comfort of your own couch. And then we give you a self-return paid address label, postage back to us with the fingerprints, and then we scan those in digitally. We also create like a gun trust, which gets a little confusing, but we offer that free because we feel like it's the best way for customers to buy a suppressor. We also let people pay while they wait. That makes the process easier. Work at events. The joke I always use is that, if you buy a Yeti cooler and you spend $500, your wife's not going to be too happy when you get home for that expenditure. But if you spent that much money and you didn't come home with anything and you may not get it for 9 months, you're going to get in more trouble. So basically what we did, I used to call it, sort of the wife satisfier or whatever. It's like easy pay. We let you pay while you wait. So guys call or come to a show and say, hey, I've only got $100 to my name. We say that's enough to get started. We'll do all the paperwork for you. We'll get everything moving. Just pay it off before before it comes back approved. Because again, we're your single point of contact. So the suppressor is sitting in our warehouse. I mean, we're paying the insurance on it and we're issuing a serial number to the ATF. But we also know that once you get in the process and you buy one, the average guy typically buys two more. So the goal is to get you happy, get you interested, but we let you pay while you wait, which is really popular. The other things we do is on the back end, the paperwork, you still have to do a 4473, the same as you would if you bought a gun somewhere else. We have a variance with the ATF to be able to do that digitally. And then also we're able to mail it to your front door. So the suppressor mails, like the back end paperwork's managed from our location in the state where you live. So if you say you live in Utah, all the paperwork is managed on the back end in Utah, and then it's mailed to your front door from our Utah location. So some of the other things we do is we thread barrels. I remember I used to work shows and guys would be like, how do I get that on the end of my gun if it's not threaded? And we said, hey, we should start a business where we thread your barrels. So we'll send the customer an empty gun case. They put their rifle in there or their barrel if it's just like an AR-15 upper. Send it to us. We thread it and send it right back to them. They get to keep the case.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
so those are some of the ways we've made it simple. And it's interesting because when you tell people that who've bought it, it's what's interesting to me is if I tell that to someone who's never bought one, they're interested in that. But the guy who's bought one before and been through a tougher process, he or she is significantly more interested in, wow, that is a whole lot easier because they know what they had to deal with the last time they bought one. So it is, you'd think it would only attract the new customer, but it also attracts people who've been through other processes that were not so organized.
Exactly. I think a lot of people just have that concern. Where am I going to go to look for one? I got to find some local gun shop that maybe has one, maybe doesn't. They haven't done transfers very often. Then they're going to send me to some law office to fill out this trust paperwork, and it's usually over their head. It's not worth the hassle, right? And that's where they stop.
Yeah, and that's what we say. Hey, the Silencer Central takes that burden on us. We manage all the paperwork for you. which, I think customers are very like, they perceive that as a huge benefit that we're sort of managing it for them. I mean, if they don't sign something within 24 hours, usually text them and say, hey, check your email. We sent you, we just need a
Yeah.
signature on this to move it forward. So a lot of hand holding, which people appreciate. I mean, people are busy. They got a lot going on. And once they get it, I find some guys even forgot they bought it. Like, oh yeah, I forgot I need to do that paperwork. So it's good to kind of have them there to remind them.
And just to be clear, because a lot of our listeners probably don't buy guns that often, but to buy a long rifle, you can buy that in multiple states as long as it's legal in your state. To buy a pistol or NFA item like a silencer, that's got to be in your state of residency. And so I think a lot of people saw Silencer Central as, wait, how do you ship it to my door? What's the catch? So can you expand on that just a little more? You said you have offices in each state, but just to be clear.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. So you're right, just like a handgun. So, if I live in South Dakota, I can only buy a handgun from a licensed dealer in the state of South Dakota, or a private sale from someone in South Dakota. So you're kind of limited to a state level. And I think that started out more from a background check perspective. But silencer suppressors, essentially the same way. For me to sell you one, I have to be licensed in your state. So basically, we're licensed in every state where they're legal. So we have a federal firearms license physically in every state. We have employees, W-2 employees that work at these facilities in each of those locations, and they're the ones managing the paperwork on the back end that allows us to ship it to the front door. So essentially, think of it as when we do the paperwork for them, we do the paperwork underneath that license for the state they live in and submit it to the ATF. And when it comes back approved, it's specific to the state where they live. That's how we're able to mail it to their front door. The other thing is, the reason why we don't have to meet face to face is there's no background check required.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's typically two ways that no background checks required. Some states have like a concealed carry, and if you have an active concealed carry in some states, you don't have to have a background check because the feds have deemed that to sort of negate the need for a background check. It sort of satisfies the Brady requirements for background checks. But then NFA is the same way. So the ATF, before they approve it, they'll do a background check on anyone who's in that trust to make sure they can legally and lawfully own a suppressor. And so since the background check's done, that's why we don't have to meet face to face to do that final paperwork.
Very good. And I know I've got Jessica out using these rifles quite a few times with a suppressor.
More in the last year than ever before.
Yeah, definitely changing hunters' perspectives all over. But someone who's brand new into this and they want to shop for a suppressor, obviously you guys are a retailer for other brands as well, but you have your own brand of silencers. Why would I go that way over shopping a different brand?
Good question. I mean, I usually say typically the best way to talk to us is usually via the phone. I mean, a lot of people buy online these days, so I don't want to dissuade that, but we just find that if you could call in, what people find out is typically you can buy a 30 cal suppressor and use it on a 6.5 and a 270 and a 308. There's sort of a universal type multi-caliber function that people aren't aware of unless they call. But when they call in and talk to our folks, they'll kind of ask you, what are you shooting? What are your goals? And then sort of help them see what all options are available out there. The benefit of getting our brand is it's typically made specifically for hunters. It's lightweight, so it's titanium. Typically, it comes apart to clean to sort of clean it out. Also, it's super quiet. Hunters typically want a little bit quieter than maybe a tactical shooter. And then the other benefit is we have them on the shelf, so it's a little bit quicker transfer. We try to keep other products on the shelf too, so we typically have them. But sometimes their supply chain is not as consistent as we would like in the suppressor market. One reason why we ended up creating our own, just it's hard to manage a business if you're trying to sell suppressors and you can't get them through a wholesaler. The hard part with a wholesaler too is typically they're taking a bite of the margin, so it allows us to sell direct and be able to use a higher quality product with all titanium, which sort of benefits the customer as well.
I like that. I was just scrolling through your website, looking at a few of the different options.
I wouldn't know the first thing about shopping for my own.
Really?
I wouldn't. You'd have to teach me.
Yeah, that's why I say, hey, just call us up and talk to our guys, our sales team here. We have a whole call center that pretty much they're available to help people and walk you through the benefits of each. But the big advantage of titanium is it's lighter weight. It's actually going to typically be quieter and it's going to hold up longer. So to have that ability to get something really lightweight on the end of the barrel, a lot of people that are hunting don't want that extra length on the end of the barrel or weight. So to go with titanium, it's always going to be lighter weight than a stainless steel.
And pretty much all of your line is titanium. Is that true?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We spend, $8 to $10 million a year in titanium, just
Jeez.
sourcing it. We buy it in bulk just to get the price down. I mean, sometimes we'll look at creating a new product and they're like, we have so much titanium, it'd be cheaper to make it out of titanium than to try to source the, stainless steel, just because we source so much of it.
Wow. Looking at your models, quick attach, direct thread, what's the most common, if I'm thinking, well, I have a rifle, it's got a muzzle brake on it, I can unscrew that. Is this going to work?
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. So typically, honestly, over the years it's changed, but now pretty much anything you have with a brake, it's gonna fall underneath a standard of a 1/2 by 28, which would be common for say like an AR platform or even a rimfire platform, and even a 9 millimeter. Or the threads for like a 308 or a 6.5, it's gonna be a 5/8 by 24. So we have an adapter that you can screw into a 5/8 by 24 that instantly makes it a 1/2 by 28. So with those, when you're able to cover 1/2 by 28 and 5/8 by 24, that's 99.9% of all rifles that you're going to shoot. So it works out really well to kind of have one suppressor and be able to use it for almost anything centerfire. Kind of that 300 rum, 300 Win Mag, 300 Weatherby, all the way down to even a rimfire 22.
Now explain to me the trust a little bit. I'm shopping through suppressors on your site. I've got to think about the add-on fees and costs associated with
Yeah,
getting this
yeah,
in
yeah,
my hand. But
yeah,
you're going to set up
yeah,
a trust for me, and what's the cost for
yeah.
that?
No charge. So just
Sweet.
it's kind of a value add of working with us. We paid an attorney to create a trust that valid in each state where you live, where customers would live, where they're legal. So the benefit of the trust, for and it honestly it's evolved over time, because back in 2016 Obama made some changes. It's probably not worth like digging into that too much, but the real benefit of the gun trust in my mind are two things. One, it allows joint ownership. So if the trust is created and you're the primary person on it, once it's approved, you could add kids, you could add grandkids, siblings, anyone that's 18 or older that can lawfully own a firearm could be on your trust. And that joint ownership scenario is they could take it out and hunt with it even if you're not there. So that's a nice benefit for sharing, if you will. The other benefit is just from a legacy perspective, it allows you to pick who gets it when you pass away. And the interesting thing about, if you look at suppressors in Europe, most of them are aluminum and they're kind of disposable. You could buy them at a hardware store. People use them and they throw them out. Whereas in the US, it's typically a, lifetime plus purchase. So, you have that titanium suppressor, it's going to last your lifetime times like 3 or 4. So the ability to pass it down to someone is beneficial, just because it's a lot of paperwork if you don't have a trust for say your spouse to have to deal with it. If you were typically, unfortunately, us as males will expire as the pass away sooner. So then the spouse, we would typically get a call from saying, hey, what do I do with the suppressor? So
Right.
by having a trust, you can identify who gets it, and you can leave it to kids, grandkids, or even people that are not even alive right now when you bought it. And it just limits the paperwork and allows them to have access to use it as well.
Now, I still don't understand trust very well. If you're talking to a guy that already has maybe a family trust set up, would you ever
Yeah, no, I probably
recommend
wouldn't.
using that
Yeah,
or not?
probably wouldn't use that. So let me
Okay.
back up a little bit. So, okay, so think of like an LLC. So my business is owned by an LLC,
Hmm.
and essentially everything is underneath that umbrella. So a trust would be very similar, and it would be like an umbrella that would own anything you put in there. So when you buy a suppressor from Silencer Central, I'm asking the feds in simplest terms to transfer the ownership of that serial number and that specific product, almost as if you were buying a car and a VIN number. I'm asking the feds to transfer the ownership from me as the dealer to your trust. So then essentially your trust owns the title to it. It'd be just like our corporate vehicles are in our LLC, very similar. Like the trust would own the suppressors. And if you think of the trust as sort of the parent owning the suppressors, then anyone you add to that trust is then going to also be kind of a part of that ownership group. Now, the benefit of using a trust over, say, like a corporation would be there's no EIN number, there's no like tax ramifications of putting someone on a trust. Whereas with an LLC, like if you add people to an LLC and it has income coming in, then it's going to create a tax liability for everyone that's on that LLC, and it just creates a lot more headache. But the trust is sort of specifically made. Typically, you hear it called like an NFA gun trust. It's specifically to kind of hold title to the silencers. Sometimes people put short barrel rifles in their machine guns, things like that. And then there's no tax application. It's very easy to add and remove people, and you can add and remove them without having It's not difficult to do. The other benefit is once you add someone, you don't have to involve the ATF. So let's
Yeah.
say the silencer's approved, and we send you the approval, and you have everything, and you say, hey, I'd like to add my brother. My son's 18. I'd like to add him. I'd like to add my wife in case she's home and she wants to use it and I'm not here. And basically, it takes a stroke of a pen for you to add those people to your trust. So there's no additional vetting with the ATF or background checks or anything like that.
Interesting.
That's really cool. I need to get my dad set up on all this, and that way when we're all home and trying to shoot pigs all throughout the day and the night, we're not worried about
absolutely.
it. I think about how many pigs I've missed over the years from not having a silencer. Like, I never used them until I moved up here and started working for Huntin Full, and it's been really cool. It's definitely a game changer. I've shot quite a few animals with it now. So
if we're using, say, not my family's trust, we've set up a NFA gun trust just for this suppressor. I mean, is there any reason you couldn't add a couple of your hunting buddies and close friends on that as well?
Yeah, most people will. Yeah, so if you add if you create a gun trust, most people will add other people to it that they're going hunting with them and they don't have one, or they want to use it when you're out of town or something like that. Yeah, it's very common.
I think that's a smart way to do it. Don't have to involve the ATF at all. It's just a trust amendment after it's all approved. Got it. Yep. So when I go through with my first gun trust, you guys are going to do the paperwork. It's ideally just me on that, just one person. Is that?
You are correct, because the problem is the more people you have on there, it just delays the vetting of it. And sometimes if you have a common name of a felon, it could add 2 or 3 months to it. So the less people, the less chance of anything to hold up the paperwork. Because the problem is if you have, let's just make up a number. Let's say you have 5 people on your trust. Then we have to source 5 sets of fingerprints, 5 photos, 5 signatures of all the paperwork, and we have to submit all that to the ATF. So that's just something that, potentially could get lost, or, someone gets delayed and then the whole thing's delayed. So typically we would create a fresh trust for you. We would submit it underneath your name. Once it's approved, add whoever you want. And even to keep it simple, once you bought another one, we would create another trust for you, just give you another free trust. And the benefit there is we would typically name it the same name, and the only differentiating factor would be the date of sort of creation, the initiation date. And we save all those in our cloud server. So if you ever needed them, we'd have them. But of course, we send it to you as well.
Interesting. So as far as, 2 things I want to touch on. You mentioned the delay. So obviously you guys are using electronic forms with the ATF now. They made all these promises last year. Where are they sitting on actual approvals of these forms?
Yes, good question. So last year, they really launched like end of December 2021 is when they launched the e-forms, and that's when we could start uploading everything digitally to the ATF. Some hiccups on the implementation, but the problem that we found was they had a boatload of paper forms that they'd accumulated during the pandemic that they decided to process before they did the digital. So it's really frustrating because, it's frustrating on both sides of the equation because, we had probably 100,000 applications in paper that were sitting at ATF waiting to be approved. And then on the other side, we're entering in all these digital ones. And we're hearing from ATF 90-day turnaround. They were going to staff the turnaround so they could get them out in 90 days. Well, what we didn't realize is they sort of paused processing anything on the digital side until they finished the paper. And it took them almost a full year to finish all the paper ones that they had backlogged. So they finished those kind of in like November, December of last year. And then once they did that, now they've started on the digital, and I feel like it's speeding up. But it's still, I would say right now it's still like probably like a 9, 8 to 9. Right now we're quoting like 6 to 8. I've seen it take, sometimes 9, but it's not where we want it to be. One thing is they did get additional funds to hire people, so they just need to go out and hire them and train them. Unfortunately, I'm always optimistic. I keep thinking, all right, e-forms is going to make it quicker. Okay, they're hiring more people. And, it just seems like it's always, when I first started doing it, it was 2 weeks, honestly. Wow. Like if you bought with a trust, we mailed it to the ATF. It was back in 2 weeks. Now, of course, that was like, 2005, no one was really buying them. The 10 people that were working at the NFA branch were probably looking for work to do, whereas now, they're really like overwhelmed. I think last I checked, they have 35 and they may have like, 20 to 25 open apps to hire more people. So it's literally, the other thing is I think there's some people in the farms community that feel like ATF doesn't want to approve them and they're just sitting on them. I mean, that's not my experience. I mean, my experience is they're probably not resourcing it properly,
Yeah,
appropriately as far as what they need. It's just a bottleneck, because those people work a ton of hours. They're working overtime. I mean, they're trying to get them out there. It's just, and I think that they've spent years trying to study their processes, but the good thing about the digital side is they can do them about the 25% the amount of time it used to take to
sure.
do a paper. So if I'm just making numbers up, but if it took 4 minutes to do paper, now it takes 1 minute to do digital. So there's some benefits there. But having been doing this 20 years, I will say it's sort of a supply and demand. So when the time to get approval goes down, demand goes up. And then once that demand goes up and they get more paperwork, then their lead times go up. So it's like this inverse curve.
Yeah,
ATF always makes fun of us when we have meetings. They're like, you guys did a great job selling these things so well that now we're so far behind that it's probably going to hurt yourselves, which at times is true.
I'm going to ask an ignorant question, but I mean, other than political reasons, like what do you know what has created that spike? Because I mean, I've hunted my whole life, and suppressors were not really a thing, even in the South, where everything's legal in Texas. It seems like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What do you think created that?
Oh, it sort of created a demand, like
Yeah.
what's making it become more popular. I think just awareness, because when I would work gun shows, even here in South Dakota, I found really almost 100% of people that came by the booth thought they were illegal. So it's just
Mm,
an awareness. I mean, the hard part for me is being the optimist. I was thinking, gosh, I could probably work gun shows for a year and I will have talked to everyone. Nope. It's just, it just takes years and years and years. And that's one thing you see a lot of people using more suppressors on hunting. So I think that sort of helped it catch on. People are using more on Outdoor Channel, things like that. So I think it's just an awareness, and then it becomes sort of a novelty. So you have some like these early adopters, but then people are still on the sidelines, like, well, I don't want to be the first guy or gal to get one. And then once they get one, they tell a friend, and it just kind of snowballs. So there's only about, last time I saw the data was in January. ATF released the numbers. There's about 3.2 million silencers in the entire universe at that point. So that's how many had been made. That's not how many are necessarily out in circulation, because we probably have 9 months worth of inventory sitting on our shelf waiting for the feds to approve.
mm,
But but what we find is probably about 1 million people own those. So 1 million people own 3 million silencers. So the number is most people end up buying three. They like them so much they end up getting another one.
sure.
I can relate
Um,
to that. Now that I've experienced it, I don't want to hunt without one.
Yeah.
And I
oh,
think,
totally, yeah.
I mean, I think also for new hunters and kids, like there's just so many benefits to having one in terms of
Totally.
hunting.
And the hard part is, like, even my kids, I think, they don't know any different. So they've never hunted, they've never shot or hunt without them. So my daughters are like, I'm like, occasionally I should take these off. Like, I don't want to, but, sometimes if you go to range to sight something in, obviously not everyone there's got a suppressor. So they hear how loud everyone else is. But it's just funny to think about, hopefully get in a scenario where a lot of people are used to them, and that's, kind of becomes a norm.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit in your experience about traveling. I know a lot of our
Yeah.
hunters, our travelers are going out of state for hunts. They're flying to Alaska. They're flying across the country. I mean, what's
Yeah.
the quick and dirty on traveling with a
Yeah.
suppressor?
Good question. So, of course, obviously, you want to check to make sure where you're hunting that they're lawful.
Yep.
A lot of people go to deer hunt in Illinois, and unfortunately, they're illegal in Illinois. So, there's not really an opportunity to hunt with them there. So, sort of the first step is to see if they're legal where you're going. They're not legal in Canada or Mexico, so that's just kind of an awareness thing there. Um, when I travel with them, a lot of times I've been known to travel without a rifle just because I'm going to a shoot and the rifle's already there, or maybe we mailed the rifles ahead of time, so I just have the suppressors. And the protocol is I'm usually very sort of nonchalant. I just say, hey, this box has suppressors in here. And some airports I'm at, they consider it a firearm and they want me to fill all the paperwork, and some don't. And then, of course, really almost 100% of the time, they say, well, you have to declare it. And then when you declare it, you're just signing the paperwork, letting them, basically, you're putting the airline on notice that you have a firearm and you're signing that it's not loaded. And then you put that in, and they put it inside there and then lock the case. Some people feel like they have to use those TSA locks that you can actually be able to, that TSA can open. You don't really want that because, I think the ATF would say that only you should have access to that firearm.
Yep.
So I use locks that don't have like the TSA key that you could go through. So I put like a regular locks on there. Usually, then what happens is, typically if it is a long gun case, they will have me take it over to TSA, and they all want to look at it. They'll scan it and then they'll put it through. So I haven't really had any problems at a state level. I mean, it gets complicated, right? So, like, what if you're flying through New Jersey and you're headed somewhere else and are illegal in New Jersey and your flight gets canceled and they say go get your bags? That could create an issue because they're illegal there. So I would say just be cognizant of where you're flying through, because that could create a difficult situation. I've gone to Africa with them. I learned recently there's some parts of Africa where they're not legal. Most parts there are. So again, just asking for an awareness. But whenever I've talked to the ATF, because I've done TV shows and I've always called ATF and said, okay, sort of the orange jumpsuit thing again. I don't want visual proof of me on TV with a suppressor and you see it's mine and say, okay, that didn't get there by itself, Mr. Maddox. Tell us a little bit how that you got it there. So I did kind of a full vetting with the ATF and the National Farms Branch just to make sure I'm in compliance. And basically the way the statutes read is that you're allowed to do what they would call like a temporary export. So it'd be in your possession. And the big key factor is you got to make sure that when you get back to customs that you can convince customs that you brought it with you. They're just going to want to make sure that you didn't. And there's a form that you can fill out for that. I'll be honest, last time I went, I didn't because I'm a dealer. I got a little bit more flexibility where I feel like I could prove that, I own the company that's engraved on the side of the suppressor. How could I not have taken it with me was sort of my position. But in that scenario, I checked it and declared it in the U.S. before I left. I put it in my checked luggage. So I put the little small case in my checked luggage, locked it up, and sent it all the way from, South Dakota to Johannesburg, and then Johannesburg to, to Namibia there. So I flew through, really from starting in the U.S. into South Africa to Namibia. So really 3 countries, and no one ever asked about it or had any questions or anything. So I think one thing that helps is if you have the global travel, because when I go now for coming back into the country, they can tell by your face recognition, and there's really I've never been stopped with that. It's just I used to scuba dive a lot before that. When you would scuba dive, you had these big, these big bags full of stuff, and they would always want to go through all of them. But now it seems like if you have the global entry stuff, you get in so much quicker. They don't even talk to you. It's just visually it recognizes you and then it lets you right in the country, and no one asks about your bag. So. I
Interesting.
found it to be pretty low key. So it's that's good. That's a benefit. Some people just put it in their gun case, check it with their gun, and just send it the same way they would a rifle.
And is it okay to have it threaded on the gun while you travel, or do you have to take it off?
It doesn't matter. Just the hard part is with a gun case, it's typically going to be too long to leave it on. So most people end up taking it off, put a thread protector on there, protect your threads while you're traveling, and then just throw it in the.
What about the paperwork you should have with you to be in compliance? Should you have a copy of your trust and your approved Form 4, or is that too much?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, something that people don't really think about. So we talked earlier about the $200 tax. So what's interesting is that Form 4 that we help you complete and it comes back approved and it's kind of a title of ownership. It's actually a tax document. So it's really like a tax return, believe it or not. Congress can regulate tax, and that's why they kind of went after the tax on the suppressors and machine guns. But so technically, because it's a tax return, the only person, my understanding, that can ask to see it would be like a treasury agent, like a tax agent, or on the criminal side of the ATF, like an ATF agent, not like the industry side that does compliance checks, but more on the on the side of the criminal side. And it's really rare, in my opinion, to see either one of those people. But to kind of cover yourself, I typically take a picture of that front page with a tax stamp on it on my phone and just leave it on my phone. I've never had anyone ask for the trust, but it's not a bad idea. I mean, I use Dropbox, so I just kind of have it in my personal Dropbox so I could pull up the PDF, which is scanned in. We email to you. I mean, we email you a copy of your trust. So even if you had to look through your old emails and show them, my experience is that if you go to a range, a lot of times they're going to want to see some paperwork. So it's not a bad idea to have that Form 4 on your phone. If you have to get it repaired, even if it's like locally, I mean, I took one in locally years ago to get it Cerakoted, and they want to copy my paperwork, not because they had to have it, but just because they were a dealer taking it into their possession. They want to make sure it was lawful. One thing that I think would be permissible is if law enforcement said, hey, I just want to check the serial number to make sure it's not stolen. I think that's probably fair for them to, see the suppressor, be able to look at the serial number, and then run a check to make sure it's not on a list of like stolen. But in reality, it's all protected underneath sort of the privacy of being a tax return, which to me is really a benefit. And I didn't really talk about it earlier, but when you buy it underneath a trust, really at ATF, it shows the title holders of the trust. It kind of, you could argue it leaves you at sort of an arm length distance. I mean, they do a background check on you, so they have an awareness that you're on the trust, but on paper, it shows it's owned by the trust and doesn't call you out specifically.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a sort of like anonymity, or it keeps where you don't, it just keeps that at an arm's length distance. It just shows the trust owns it, not necessarily the person. You just have to be aware of that, because you can call the ATF while you're waiting for your approval, and they'll want to know that, like what's the serial number, and then who's the person that's going to get it. It's it's going to be the trust name is the owner of it once it gets approved.
It seems like there's more security in the process than there is in the paperwork or the final.
That's a really good point. And I sometimes hate to give this example, but because she mentioned Texas, we send a lot of suppressors, silencers to Texas. And occasionally,
I bet you
God
do.
forbid, one, yeah, God forbid, one occasionally will get stolen or get lost, or something will go sideways. And I tell you, when I call the ATF, I don't want to say they hang up on me, but they don't get as excited as I want them to be, because sometimes, like suppressors, I mean, even though we require a signature required, sometimes they'll deliver them to the wrong person, and I always think, gosh, if you could just call that apartment complex and tell them you're looking for a suppressor, they're going to find it really quickly than me calling.
Yeah.
But ATF just doesn't get super excited about a suppressor. Now, it may be different, like Boston, Massachusetts, or somewhere where they're illegal, but it just, in the South or anywhere they're popular, it just tells me that they're not a public safety issue.
Yeah.
ATF sort of mission critical focus, when you hear the director talk about, it's like protecting the public safety of America. And that, I'm not saying that silencers aren't, but it just doesn't seem like it's on their radar at all from a public
Yeah.
safety concern, which is good for me, because like hopefully there's less regulations and less issues for our customers and sort of in the future.
Yeah. That's really good. It makes sense though. I mean, I don't know how you deal with jumping through all this government stuff, but we appreciate that there are people like you, your team, that does that for us.
Yeah, and I sometimes use the analogy, gosh, I mean, our taxes get so complicated. You typically have like a program or a CPA or someone that knows what they're doing to sort of facilitate that. I agree. It's easy for a lot of people to say, it's rubbish. It shouldn't be this way. This is horrible. A silencer doesn't have a trigger, no bullet in it. Unfortunately, I've just kind of accepted it is what it is. How do we create a not necessarily a workaround, but how do we work through it and make it easy for everyone?
Yep.
And I will be honest, I feel like ATF has worked with me when I go to them and say, hey, here's what I would propose we do. It doesn't, it's not in violation of the law. It would actually make it easier for you to inspect me. If everything's digital, you could just sort of search through it. And I say, and here's the benefit to our customer. And a lot of times they'll go along with it.
Very good. Well, you've shared a wealth of knowledge with us today. This is good stuff. I know everybody is at a different place along their suppressor journey, whether they've decided they've added it to a cart but never checked out, they've borrowed somebody else when they're shooting together, like, hey, let me shoot that, just see how the recoil is. Whatever it is, we're all at a different point. But my plug is, if you're not hunting with a suppressor, you're missing out, honestly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, it's funny, just like anecdotally, I used to work shows, and I think my wife, she's a little bit more mild mannered than I am, probably, maybe not as assertive. And she's like, do you ever feel bad, like being aggressive at shows? Because usually if I could tell someone's interested, I'm like, dude, you've walked by this booth every year for the last, I don't know how many years. You bitch about how long it's going to take to get it. If you'd bought it, you'd have like 20. Come on, let's man up. Let's get your man card out. Let's get one. And my wife will always be like, gosh, don't you feel horrible? And I told her no, because like 100% of the time, once someone uses it, they love it and they want another one. Usually they're saying, man, I wish you'd forced me to do this sooner. I saw a guy at a swim meet the other day, my daughter doing swimming, and he's like, you remember me? And I go, yeah, you bought one like 15 years ago. And he said, when I bought that, all of my friends that I coyote hunt with said, it's too expensive. I'll never buy one. The process takes too long. I don't want to give the government that information. I'm not giving them a $200 tax. I mean, they had every reason on the sun why they didn't want one. He said, fast forward 15 years, they all have 3 each. So I agree with you. There's this sort of continuum, but I honestly don't think I've ever met anyone that once they used it was like, oh wow, I'm stuck. This is good. I'm in.
Yeah, that's a good point. And even your marksmen and your long range shooters, and we deal with a lot of these high end gun companies, like they're all going to recommend that you get one.
Oh, yeah.
And they're going to build you a barrel and cut everything so that you're ready for it.
No, totally. I wish I could find a business model that would work where I could like travel around the country, let people shoot them. It's hard to scale that because like you said, like people see it go, I got to have one, but not today. And then, or, a lot of time ranges will worry about their liability insurance if it's a commercial activity, like if you're there selling suppressors. So, it's been hard, but it'd be great if I could figure out a way to, show up at a range, get a good crowd there, get everyone behind it, let them use it. And then once they use it, they'd be like, all right, I'm in.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so the best way to figure out what they need, go to silencercentral.com, give you guys a
Yeah.
call.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can buy online, but like I said, we just find we survey our customers. They have a much better experience if they have an actual like sort of sales guy they've talked with, who's sort of their point of contact. Something will come up where they have a question or they want to refer a friend or anything during the process. It's good for them to feel like they have someone here at the mothership kind of looking out for them, because it feels like when you buy it online, it just kind of goes through the whole process and it's all automated. Everything's like we'll send you a text and say, hey, don't forget to sign this. Sometimes it's better if you feel like you say, oh, I want to call Drew and see what does this mean next? Looks like I'm approved. What happens now? Or, so calling seems to work out really well.
Sweet. Anything else, Jess?
Well, I just wanted to say that aside from the fact that we're on here because of a product and Silencer Central, I think your story is really cool. I picked up on that immediately, and I just think when people are backed into a corner, they find a way to get out of it and fight, and you've
Yeah.
obviously created something super powerful. So
No,
congrats.
thanks.
I'm glad you got fired.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah. I mean, God, boy, you should have seen the look on my wife's face. I mean, she felt like I had the best job in the whole city. I had a company car and they gave me paternity leave. There's a French company. Yeah. I remember calling my lawyer and I was like, dude, I think they're going to fire me. He's like, Brandon, they're a French company based in New Jersey. It's a pharmaceutical company. They've already fired you. They just haven't told you yet. And he was right.
That's cool.
No, that's good
awesome.
feedback. What I found out about, meeting with your team is you guys are sort of into the whole research, like for your customers, what they're going to do, where they're going to go. I mean, like to the T. And when I sat down with you all there at that Western Expo, you all knew more about me than anyone I'd ever sat down with. So I was super impressed that you guys turned on your, I don't know if it's Inspector Gadget hat or what you guys have, but you guys had me figured out. I was like, man, those are some of the most in-depth questions. I was super impressed that you guys knew that much about me. So good
I
good
appreciate
job on
that.
your end for sort of vetting who you meet with, but also knowing a lot about them when you do.
No, we appreciate that compliment, and it is our job. We like to go to the source. We like to only propagate true information that comes right from the guys that are doing the best at it, and that's kind of how we built our brand and our podcast and all our state information. So time is just so limited. Resources are limited for all these hunters, and we want to make the most of it.
Yeah, perfect. No,
So,
appreciate this opportunity. It's great.
well, thanks for your time today. We'll end the podcast there. Put all the links in the show notes on where you can get hooked up with Silencer Central, and we'll talk to you a little bit later.
Perfect. Sounds great.